Thursday, partly cloudy, with northwest winds at 5 to 10 knots, becoming 20 to 25 by the afternoon. A small craft advisory is in effect for the Washington coast. The tinny robotic voice on the VHS haltingly stuttered out the marine weather report as I clicked shut the door to the wheelhouse behind me. Well, it sure sounds that we're not going to get in as many sets as we'd hoped today, I said, half relieved. I wanted the money from a good haul, but it was not a good day to be on the water. Sorry, who decides that again? Growled the captain, never taking his eyes off the gray-green swell that rolled just past the foredeck. I have never had to work for a more miserable man. Arrogant and insecure at the same time, Captain Ron, as he insisted that we call him every time. He had been running a little gill netter out of the Westport for the better part of 30 years. As far as I could tell, he hated every second of it. Now, to be fair, it's often terrible work. You can spend hours out in the rain and wind and end up with nothing to show for it. The fine mesh of the nets bite into your hands when the skin is soft from being soaked. And death gripping hundreds of pounds of water-like plastic every day plays hell with your joints. No matter how much he tries to straighten them, Ron's fingers always bent a little at each knuckle, like a wave trapped between cresting and breaking. And just wanted to let you know that we're ready to haul in, I said, ignoring the passive-aggressive dig. So get to it, he replied. His eyes flashed at me, showing that I was no longer welcome in his diminutive throne room. I stepped through the door and onto the dock where Roger, the only other deckhand, was waiting by the net drum. Some boats will have as many as 4 guys hauling in fish, but the Semper was a small boat and Ron was cheap. Pleasant as ever, Roger quipped. Yeah, let's do this as quick as we can. He's going to insist on a bunch of sets today and I just want to get home. I was in a hurry because I needed a pack. I'm at university majoring in fisheries science and my junior year would be starting up the next week. I had spent all of my summer and most of September working on Semper to fill in the gap in tuition I can't cover with financial aid. But we had had kind of a crappy season, so I was working up until the very last minute. I settled into place against the aft rail and I gave Roger a thumbs up. He pushed down on the button that rotates the net drum, and as the net started to reel in, I worked to keep any loose pieces from snagging before they got to the tender bars. Here and there we'd find a few salmon in the net. Roger would take his finger off the button and the net would jerk to a halt. We would shake the fish out onto the deck and kick them into the hold, and then we'd go back to winding it up. After a few minutes of reeling in, the fish just stopped and it continued like that for a while. The boredom and disappointment was really starting to get to me. That and the wind had started kicking up. It was getting harder and harder to tend the net and I could hear the surge thudding and hissing along the hull. After what felt like an eternity of no fish, finally something with the silver tint flashed as it left the water. What the hell? Roger said in a voice that was both curious and a little nervous. There, dangling by its gills from the net, was the most unusual fish that either of us had ever seen. It was 4 feet long, but so thin that if you looked at it from the top or bottom, you could barely see it. The side end of the fish looked like a shimmering blade of silver grass. From just behind the wide head, hundreds of tiny fin spines held up a bright orange ribbon of translucent flesh that ran until the tail tapered into nothing. As it dangled there, the fish's long dorsal fin undulated hypnotically. Underneath us, the boat seemed to rock in time with the waves of motion that flowed slowly from its head to the deck. But what really caught my attention was the fish's eye. The pearly disc was so enormous that it took up most of the fish's face, and it roved about. At first, the gigantic black, ovular pupils seemed not to focus on anything, but then it stared Roger straight in the face. It lingered on him for a while and then slowly revolved over to me. As the mercurial ring around that velvety black circle held my gaze, I felt like I was being questioned. Why? How did I get here? It seemed to say. The boat rocked and the waves danced, tall and slow, around us while the wind hummed softly in our ears as we stared in silence. "King of the Salmon," I finally said, and the wind pulled my words from my mouth as I left it. "What?" Roger called with a raised voice and came closer to hear better. "What did you call this thing?" "King of the Salmon," I said a little louder. "That's dumb. You're being overly dramatic," replied Roger. But I could see he looked at the fish out of the side of his eye when he said it, like he was worried it wouldn't approve of his disbelief. "No, really, that's what they're called. They don't have another common name. It's related to the oarfish. I think the name comes from a tribal legend." "Macaw!" Roger and I both jumped as Ron's gruff voice clattered into the air. "It's a macaw story. The king of the salmon lead the schools back home. They're a standard bearer, a guide." Ron's voice seemed loaded with reverence, but also furious at its own belief. "Alright, well, it's cool and weird and all, but it's still bycatch," Roger uttered nervously. "It's still alive. Let's get it out and let it go." I started working to disentangle the king of the salmon. I was going to have to work slow to keep from startling it. I didn't want to thrash it and killing itself in the mash. As I started in, Ron's rake of a hand gripped my wrist. He pulled it away slowly and turned me aside so he could look closer. Ron leaned down, looking the fish in the eye for a moment. And then suddenly, his other hand flashed out holding a knife. With a single cut, he severed the king's spinal cord like he had done to 100,000 other fish. Deep crimson blood spilled down as one last wave rolled along the dorsal fin and shuddered against the deck. The wind went dead. As we came down off a swell, the sea went flat. "Stop wasting time, you're supposed to be working," Ron commanded as he unceremoniously shook the dead fish from the net. It collapsed to the deck, folding like a ribbon. "You asshole!" I shouted, my blood boiling. "Captain asshole," he menaced back, pushing me out of the way and smearing blood all over my grundins. "Haul the rest in and set it again," he ordered at the top of his voice and stalked to the wheelhouse. In the brief moment that he lingered in the doorway, I thought I heard the tinny voice on the VHF again. Small craft advisory had been upgraded to a cut off by the door slamming shut. Roger and I stood glaring at the door for a bit, both fuming. "Screw him," Roger muttered and glanced down at the king of the salmon's body. I walked over and I picked up the rumpled form, carrying the corpse over to the side, and I slowly lowered it into the ocean. The body uncoiled as it sank, diving down as though the fish were still alive. A starburst of refracted sunlight ringed the king's luminescent body as it descended, and when the last glimpse of its tail drifted into the dark green sea, a hole in the clouds closed and the ocean went dark. The wind started again, and the swell lifted us high onto a hill of water. Roger and I started hauling the net again. Hundreds of salmon wriggled as we pulled them in. On any other day, we would have whooped and shouted for the size of this catch, but Ron had killed any satisfaction we could have taken home. By the end of that haul, we were almost full up. We should have just motored home. In the northwest, we could see gray clouds blending into the juniper green sea. The whole horizon looked blurry like an out-of-focus photograph, a sure sign that it was dumping rain. But there was no chance Ron would take us in without at least one more set, not after I had called him an asshole to his face. I rapped on one of the wheelhouse windows to let Ron know we were ready to set again. Without looking back at me, he throttled the engines and we bounced along the chop. I glared at the back of his head the whole time, willing all my frustration and exhaustion into his skull. When we got to whatever underwater feature Ron thought salmon would be hanging out at, he held up his hand. I could see the dried blood still caking his fingers like a horrid frosting as he gave us a signal to set again. Ron slowed the boat to a crawl, and we unspooled the net. And then we just had to drift for a while. Just had to wait. Normally we'd go in and play cribbage or listen to a podcast and half doze off. But neither me nor Roger wanted to be cramped into that small space with a pissed off captain. The hazy gray horizon loomed closer as though the world was shrinking. The wind started to become more unpredictable. Long streams of cold air would flow over us for a while, and then suddenly fishtail in every direction like the tension on the line had been snapped. Roger had settled into a crouch below the cap rail to get out of the wind. I leaned on the starboard side, staring out into the undulating sea. Waves rolled by, moving like fluid pyramids whose tops were blown into a million foaming pieces by the wind as they crested. The swell mounted, waves piled up on wave and didn't drop back down. "This is bad," Roger shouted as the rain started down. And as he said it, we reached the crest of a big wave and started sliding down into a gray gully of water. I turned to look at him, tucked in behind the rail. His corpse-white face and glassy eyes assured me that he was seasick. Semper rocked nauseatingly as we rose up to the next swell. And then suddenly, the whole boat jerked violently in the direction of the net. The aluminum frame moaned from the abrupt change from smooth to sharp motion. "We have to get this thing in," I shouted to Roger, pointing at the net. "The weight is going to roll us over if we hit another big one like that." His head quivered up and down in rapid agreement, and Roger dragged himself up to the hydraulic controls. I saw him pause and gulp, like he had to swallow some vomit. I waddled over to the aft rail with my legs spread well apart to try and balance as we rocked. We tipped unexpectedly. I stutter-stepped a few times and thudded into the cold metal of my destination. Catching myself and shaking off the inevitable bruise forming on my hip, I gave Roger the thumbs up. Roger hit the control and the hydraulic motor started to whir, but the drum wouldn't spin. It was like something was holding the net, pulling against our reel. Roger let off of the button, waited a second, and then pressed again. The motor thrummed and vibrated. I could see steam starting to rise from the housing as the engine strained and rain hissed and splattered on its surface. "Stop! Cut it off!" I roared as I held up my hand. As we crested each wave, the net strained against the drum. But as we dropped, slack came into the lines. Looking out at the floats, I felt that fragment of weightlessness in my stomach that comes just before a dip, and I signaled to Roger to haul in. The net started to coil around the drum, like a snake laying to rest somewhere safe. I turned towards Roger and the triumphant smile died on my face as I caught sight of Ron standing just outside of the wheelhouse. The hood on his foul weather jacket was down in the rain, which had started to slacken, and had slicked his gray hair into long weeds. His feet were planted firmly apart and he rocked with the ship as though he were bolted to the deck. In his right hand, he held the long knife. The king of salmon's blood had rehydrated in spray, and rusty crimson peeled a noose from Ron's hand. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, spittle mixing with flying seawater. "We're not even close to our soak time." "Are you kidding me?" I screamed back. "It's blowing up to drown us all, and you want to catch more fish." "Roger, lower it back," he growled, just loud enough to be heard over the howling air. Roger gazed in fear at Ron's crazed visage for a moment and then his expression changed. A defiant glare lowered itself over his eyes and the drum motor hummed to life. Ron stepped forward. "You ungrateful bastards," he menaced. As he came towards us, he slowly raised his hand until the knife was pointing directly at me. At that same time, the boat rolled down the hillside of a huge watery surge. A column of sunlight slanted through, turning the wall of water behind Ron all to green glass. All except a monstrous, pearly disc set in the center with a velvet black oval. The obsidian orb locked onto Ron. As we settled into the valley between swells, a wave hammered over the cap rail and slammed into him. He stumbled towards me as another surge crashed across the deck, battering Ron onto his knees. He struggled to rise, and the knife clattered on the deck as he used both hands to pick himself up. Ron towered there, teeth gritted, brow furrowed, Rage and desperation glazed across his face. And behind him, the hydraulic motor on the Ned drum strained again. Paralyzed with fear, Roger was holding down the button like it was the only thing keeping him alive. But the lines had gone as taut as if a giant hand were straining to pull the boat beneath the waves. Ron looked at me, and then glanced down at the blade rolling on the deck. He slowly started to bend to pick it up when every fiber holding the net of the drum snapped at once. A solid mass of line, floats, and plastic mesh came flying aft and collided with Ron, ensnaring him and dragging him over the rail into the rolling sea. I pivoted to look over in time to see Ron's head still at the surface. His neck was encircled with net just under his jawline, holding his gaze up into the translucent walls of water that surrounded us on all sides. He gasped rapidly for air in the freezing water, his eyes wide in confusion. And then just before he was jerked under by the weight of a half-ton of gill net, terrified understanding. I turned to look where he had been staring to see the pearly circle of light through the waves blink out slowly as the clouds shifted beyond the swell. The sea seemed to calm a little. Roger and I stared for a minute, and then ran into the wheelhouse, leaving the door open behind him. I grabbed a life ring and a couple of PFDs and started tossing them over to the side to leave a trail to where Ron had gone down. Coast Guard, this is FB Semper. Our captain has gone overboard. I repeat, our captain has gone overboard in a heavy swell. Copy, Semper. We have a vessel inbound on... I didn't hear the rest of the response as the door slammed shut from the rocking of the boat. Cold, tired, and numb, I gazed down at the breadcrumb trail, a bright orange bobbing away on the ashen rollers.